They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but Sarah preferred hers served from the back seat of a vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom. Caleb Sterling stood at the altar of the St. Regis Hotel, a smug grin plastered on his face, checking his watch. He had invited his poor, struggling ex-wife solely to humiliate her, to let her see exactly what she had lost. He wanted her to feel small amidst the glitz of his high society wedding. But when the double doors swung open, the room didn't gasp for the bride. They gasped for Sarah. She didn't arrive in rags, she arrived in couture, and she wasn't alone. The woman linking arms with her wasn't a date, it was the one person Caleb feared most in the world. In seconds, his wedding of the century was about to turn into a funeral for his career. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, and textured like the skin of an expensive reptile. It had arrived 3 weeks ago at the small, cramped apartment Sarah Miller was renting in Queens, squeezed between a pile of overdue electric bills and junk mail. Sarah sat at her wobbly kitchen table, staring at the gold leaf calligraphy. Mr. Caleb Sterling and Miss Jessica Van Doren invite you to celebrate their union. It was a summons, not an invitation. 3 years ago, Caleb had thrown Sarah out of their shared life with the emotional equivalent of a garbage bag. "You're dead weight, Sarah," he had told her, adjusting his silk tie in the mirror of the house she had helped him renovate. "I'm a vice president at Oakhaven Capital now. I need a wife who fits the part. You're just a librarian. You're small. You don't shine." He had left her with nothing but a meager settlement that barely covered the moving van. He had taken the house, the friends, and the reputation. He spun a narrative that she was unstable, lazy, and holding him back. Now, he was marrying Jessica Van Doren. Sarah knew the name. Everyone in New York finance knew the name. Jessica was the daughter of the chairman of the board at Oakhaven. It wasn't just a marriage, it was a merger. Caleb was securing his throne. Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a text from Caleb. He hadn't blocked her number, likely because he enjoyed sending her sporadic updates on his success. "Caleb, did you get the invite? I'd love for you to come. No hard feelings, right? Plus, there's an open bar. I know things are tight for you, so think of it as a free meal on me. Just try to dress appropriate." See. Sarah felt the familiar sting of tears, but they didn't fall. Not this time. She looked around her apartment. It was small. She was struggling, or at least that's what Caleb thought. The truth was more complicated. After the divorce, Sarah hadn't just cried. She had reinvented. She had gone back to school, finishing her master's in art history and corporate curation. She had been grinding, working 18-hour days as an unseen assistant for high-end art dealers. But Caleb didn't know that. To him, she was still the woman who clipped coupons. She picked up the phone to decline, but then her eyes caught the date. October 14th. A slow, cold smile spread across her face. October 14th wasn't just Caleb's wedding day. It was the same day her current employer, a woman so reclusive and powerful that even Caleb's bosses trembled at her name, was returning to New York to finalize the acquisition of a certain financial firm, Oakhaven Capital. Sarah typed a reply. "Sarah, I'll be there, Caleb. I wouldn't miss it for the world." "Are you sure you want to do this, Sarah?" The voice was raspy, commanding, and undeniably expensive. It came from the woman sitting opposite Sarah, in a private jet, cruising at 40,000 feet above the Atlantic. Victoria Kensington set down her espresso. She was 62, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob that looked like it could slice glass. She was the matriarch of the Kensington dynasty, a conglomerate that owned everything from shipping lines in Greece to tech startups in Silicon Valley. She was also Sarah's boss, and, over the last 2 years, her mentor. Sarah looked up from her tablet. "He thinks I'm coming to beg for scraps, Victoria. He invited me to show his new fiancée how pathetic I am compared to her." Victoria laughed, a dry sound. Men like Caleb Sterling are predictable. They build tall towers on foundations of sand. He's currently trying to push a merger between Oakhaven and my subsidiary, K-Corp. He's desperate to impress me. He's been emailing my secretary for months, begging for a meeting. "He doesn't know you're the one buying Oakhaven out from under him, does he?" Sarah asked. "No," Victoria smirked. "And he certainly doesn't know that my executive director of strategic acquisitions, the person whose signature is required to save his job, is his ex-wife." Sarah had risen through the ranks of the Kensington Empire with a speed that baffled outsiders. It wasn't nepotism, it was competence. When Victoria had been recovering from hip surgery and unable to travel, Sarah had stepped in to manage a crisis at an auction house in London. She had saved the company millions. Victoria, who despised incompetence and valued loyalty above all, had taken Sarah under her wing. "He treated you like a disposable object," Victoria said, her eyes narrowing. "I have read his file, Sarah. The embezzlement allegations he pinned on his previous assistant. The way he manipulates his team. He is a liability." "He's a narcissist," Sarah corrected. "Precisely. And I hate narcissists. They make sloppy business partners." Victoria stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the clouds. "The wedding is at the St. Regis, correct?" "Yes, Saturday. I was planning to skip the festivities and just crush his company on Monday morning," Victoria mused. "But I do enjoy a good show, and I haven't been to a wedding in years." She turned back to Sarah, a wicked glint in her eye. "You accepted the invitation?" "Yes." "Good. But you can't go alone. It looks desperate." Sarah sighed. "I don't have a date, Victoria. I've been working too hard to date." "I didn't say you needed a date, darling. I said you shouldn't go alone." Victoria tapped her manicured nail on the mahogany table. "He invited his poor ex-wife. He expects you to arrive in an Uber, wearing a dress from 3 seasons ago. Instead, I think we should arrive together." Sarah froze. "You? You'd go with me? To Caleb's wedding?" "Why not?" Victoria shrugged. "I am technically the owner of his company as soon as the ink dries on Monday. It's only polite for the boss to drop by. And if I happen to be the +1 of the woman he threw away?" Victoria smiled, and it was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. "It will destroy him psychologically before I even fire him professionally." "He won't recognize you immediately," Sarah noted. "You've been out of the public eye for 5 years. He knows the name Victoria Kensington. He knows the power. But he's never met you face to face. He thinks you're an invalid living in Switzerland." "Perfect," Victoria said. "Then let's go shopping. If we are going to crash a wedding, Sarah, we are going to do it in a way that ensures they talk about it for the next decade." The day of the wedding. The St. Regis, New York was dripping in flowers, white hydrangeas, imported orchids, and crystal chandeliers that cost more than a house. Caleb had spared no expense, mostly because he was spending his future father-in-law's money. In the groom's suite, Caleb was adjusting his cufflinks. They were gold, engraved with his initials. "You look like a king, bro," his best man, Greg, said, handing him a glass of scotch. "I feel like one," Caleb said, checking his reflection. "Today seals it. Once I marry Jessica, her dad puts me on the board. Then I finalize the deal with the Kensington Group, and I'm untouchable." "Did you hear your ex is coming?" Greg laughed. That's savage, man. Why'd you invite her? Caleb smirked, taking a sip of the expensive liquor. Because Jessica needed a confidence boost. She's been worried about the ex-wife, Shadow. I want her to see Sarah. I want everyone to see Sarah. Sad, lonely, wearing off-the-rack polyester. It'll make Jessica shine brighter. It's a contrast play, Greg. Basic optics. You're cold, Caleb. I'm successful, Caleb corrected. There's a difference. He checked his phone. No messages from the Kensington team. He was annoyed. He had sent 6 emails to the Director of Acquisitions, hoping to get a verbal agreement before the wedding, to announce it during his toast. But the director, some ghost named S. Miller, never replied. Whatever, Caleb muttered. I'll handle Miller on Monday. He walked out to the ballroom. The guests were arriving. The elite of Manhattan. Bankers, models, politicians. He shook hands, flashing his charming, practiced smile. Where is she? Jessica hissed, appearing at his side. She looked beautiful, but her face was tight with stress. Is she here yet? Who? Sarah? Caleb chuckled. Relax, babe. She probably took the subway. She'll be late. I just don't want a scene, Caleb. There won't be a scene. She's too timid for a scene. She'll sit in the back, eat the free chicken, and leave. At that moment, the noise outside the ballroom changed. It wasn't the usual chatter of guests arriving. It was a sudden, hushed silence that rippled from the foyer into the main hall. Caleb frowned. What's going on? He stepped away from Jessica and walked toward the entrance. A valet ran past him, looking flustered. Mr. Sterling, you need to see this. See what? Did someone crash the car? No, sir. It's a motorcade. A motorcade? Who the hell is here? The president? Caleb pushed through the doors onto the sidewalk. He froze. It wasn't a motorcade of politicians. It was 3 blacked-out SUVs, flanking a vintage, silver and black Rolls-Royce Phantom 4, the kind of car usually reserved for royalty. The license plate didn't have numbers. It just had a family crest. The chauffeur, dressed in a uniform sharper than Caleb's wedding tuxedo, walked around and opened the rear door. Caleb held his breath, expecting a celebrity. Maybe a Saudi prince he had courted for investment? A leg emerged, a stiletto heel, red-soled, hitting the pavement with authority. Then the woman stepped out. It was Sarah. But it wasn't the Sarah he knew. The Sarah he knew wore oversized cardigans and messy buns. This woman was wearing a custom crimson silk gown that hugged every curve, structural and avant-garde, looking like modern armor. Her hair was sleek, pulled back to reveal diamond drop earrings that caught the afternoon sun like flash bulbs. She looked taller, fiercer. Caleb's mouth fell open. Sarah! She didn't look at him. She turned back to the car and extended her hand. Careful. The step is high. A second woman emerged, older, radiating a terrifying amount of cold elegance, dressed in a charcoal power suit that made the surrounding tuxedos look like costumes. Sarah linked arms with the older woman. They turned in unison, looking at Caleb. The older woman adjusted her dark sunglasses, sliding them down her nose to look at Caleb with eyes the color of ice. So, the older woman said, her voice carrying over the silent crowd, this is the man who thought he was too good for you? He looks adequate, at best. Caleb's face turned red. Excuse me. Who are you? This is a private event. Sarah finally looked at him. Her eyes were devoid of the love she once had, and devoid of the pain he hoped to see. They were just professional. Hello, Caleb, Sarah said calmly. You said I could bring a +1 if I found anyone willing to be seen with me. I believe those were your words? Yeah, but I'd like you to meet my boss, Sarah said, gesturing to the woman. And your future owner, Victoria Kensington." The colour drained from Caleb's face so fast, he looked like a corpse. Kensington, he stuttered. Victoria smiled, and Caleb felt a shiver go down his spine. "Shall we go inside, Caleb? I'm dying to see the seating chart. I do hope you didn't put Sarah near the kitchen. I'm afraid I have very specific requirements for my executive director." The silence in the St. Regis ballroom was heavier than the crystal chandeliers overhead. As Sarah and Victoria walked through the gilded double doors, the air seemed to leave the room. Caleb scurried behind them like a nervous waiter, his earlier confidence evaporating with every click of Sarah's heels on the marble floor. He watched the heads turn. He saw the whispers ripple through the crowd of New York's elite. They weren't whispering about the bride. They were whispering about the woman in crimson. Isn't that Caleb's ex-wife? A woman in emerald silk whispered loudly, leaning into her husband. "I thought she worked at a library. She's wearing a limited edition Vera Wang. That dress costs more than my car." "And look who she's with," the husband muttered, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "That's the Kensington matriarch. I read she was retired in the Alps. What is she doing here?" At the far end of the room, standing under a massive arch of white roses, Jessica Van Doren froze. She had spent 6 months planning this entrance. This was supposed to be her moment. But no one was looking at her. Every pair of eyes was glued to the entrance, where Sarah stood like a conquering queen. Jessica stormed over to Caleb, grabbing his arm hard enough to wrinkle his tuxedo jacket. "Caleb," she hissed through a clenched smile. "What is she doing here? And why is she dressed like she's going to the Met Gala? You said she was a mouse, Caleb. That is not a mouse. That is a predatory cat." Caleb wiped sweat from his forehead. I don't know, Jess. She brought a guest. A very important guest." "I don't care if she brought the Queen of England," Jessica snapped. "Get them to their seats. Get them out of the spotlight. Now." Caleb nodded frantically. "Right. The seats." He hurried ahead of Sarah and Victoria, trying to regain some semblance of control. He plastered his fake corporate smile back onto his face. "Ladies," Caleb said, his voice cracking slightly. "If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your table. We're about to start the speeches." Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Lead the way, Caleb." Caleb led them away from the dance floor, away from the head table, and away from the windows with the view of Central Park. He led them past the ice sculpture, past the buffet line, and toward the swinging service doors where the waiters were bringing out trays of dirty dishes. There, tucked into a dark corner, next to the emergency exit and the restrooms, was a small, wobbly round table. It had no centerpiece, just a few scattered petals. The number card read, Table 19. The other guests at Table 19 were an odd assortment. Caleb's old college roommate, who had just gotten out of rehab, a distant cousin from Ohio, who was complaining about the price of parking, and a disgruntled intern from Oakhaven. "Here we are," Caleb said, gesturing to the table with a cruel glint returning to his eyes. He felt a surge of petty triumph. So what if she arrived in a Rolls-Royce? She was still sitting by the toilet. "I know it's a bit cozy. But we had a very tight guest list, Sarah. You understand?" He waited for Sarah to look embarrassed. He waited for her to hang her head. Instead, Victoria Kensington stepped forward. She looked at the table, then at the restroom door which swung open, releasing a waft of air freshener and bleach. She looked at the plastic chairs. Then she threw her head back and laughed. It was a loud, genuine laugh that echoed off the walls. "Oh, this is rich." Victoria wiped a tear from her eye. "Sarah, you didn't tell me he was a comedian." Caleb frowned. "I'm sorry." Victoria turned her cold, ice-blue gaze onto Caleb. The laughter vanished instantly. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Do you honestly expect the chairwoman of Kensington Global Enterprises to sit next to the latrine?" Caleb swallowed. The seating chart was finalized weeks ago. I can't change it, Victoria said. It wasn't a request. But change it. Before Caleb could stutter another excuse, a booming voice interrupted them. Victoria Kensington. A portly, balding man in a tuxedo that cost $10,000 came rushing across the room, nearly knocking over a waiter. It was Richard Van Doren, Jessica's father, the chairman of Oakhaven Capital, and technically Caleb's boss. Richard looked like he had seen a ghost. His face was pale, his eyes bulging. He knew exactly who Victoria was. He had been trying to get a meeting with her acquisitions team for 2 years. His entire company's survival depended on the merger she controlled. "Richard," Victoria nodded slowly, recognizing him. "It's been a while." "My God," Richard gasped, grabbing Victoria's hand and shaking it vigorously. "I had no idea you were in New York. I would have sent a car. Why didn't Caleb tell me?" Richard spun on his new son-in-law, his face turning purple. "Caleb, you moron! You put Victoria Kensington at table 19. I didn't know it was her," Caleb pleaded, his hands shaking. "It was just Sarah's +1. "Sarah's +1? Richard looked at Sarah, really looking at her for the first time in years. He remembered her as the quiet wife who brought Caleb lunch at the office. He blinked. "Sarah? You know Victoria?" Sarah smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Richard. Yes, we're close, very close." "Mr. Van Doren," Victoria interjected smoothly, linking her arm with Sarah's. "Sarah is not just my +1. She is my right hand. And frankly, I'm insulted. We came here to discuss business regarding the Oakhaven merger in a civil setting. But if this is how your family treats executives..." She let the sentence hang in the air like a guillotine blade. Richard Van Doren looked like he was about to have a heart attack. No, absolutely not. Misunderstanding. A terrible mistake." He turned to the head waiter, snapping his fingers. "You, bring 2 chairs to the head table. Now, move Jessica's cousins to the back. Ms. Kensington and Sarah are sitting with the family." "But Dad!" Jessica shrieked, appearing behind him. "That's the bridal table. You can't put his ex-wife at the bridal table." "Shut up, Jessica," Richard roared, shocking the entire room into silence. "Do you want to have a wedding, or do you want to be bankrupt by Tuesday? They sit at the head table." 10 minutes later, Sarah found herself sitting directly opposite the bride and groom. The head table was raised on a platform, overlooking the entire ballroom. Sarah sipped her vintage Dom Perignon, feeling the eyes of 300 people boring into her. To her right sat Victoria, looking bored and elegant. To her left sat Richard Van Doren, who was sweating profusely and refilling her water glass every 30 seconds. Directly across from her, Caleb was sawing at his filet mignon with unnecessary aggression. He wouldn't look at her. Jessica beside him was practically vibrating with rage. She kept stabbing her salad, her eyes darting daggers at Sarah's dress. "So," Richard said, his voice overly loud and jovial, trying to break the suffocating tension. "Sarah, it's amazing to see you. You look prosperous. What have you been doing with yourself?" Sarah set down her glass. "I went back to school, Richard, got my master's. Then I started working in acquisitions." "Acquisitions? Really?" Caleb scoffed, finally looking up. He couldn't help himself. His ego was bruised, and he needed to belittle her. "What, like buying office supplies for a library?" Victoria paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. She looked at Caleb with mild amusement. "Actually, Sarah said calmly. I specialize in distressed assets, companies that are failing due to poor management. I evaluate them, strip them down, and decide if they're worth saving or if we should just sell them for parts. She held Caleb's gaze. It requires a very specific eye for value. And for fraud. Caleb's knife screeched against his plate. Is that so? Yes, Sarah continued. In fact, that's why I'm here. Victoria and I have been looking closely at a mid-sized firm here in New York, Oakhaven Capital. The table went deadly silent. Jessica dropped her fork. Caleb laughed nervously. You? You're looking at Oakhaven. Please, Sarah, be serious. Oakhaven is being acquired by the Kensington Group. I've been negotiating the deal myself with their director. Have you? Sarah asked, tilting her head. Who have you been emailing, Caleb? A Ms. S. Miller, Caleb said arrogantly. Sharp woman. Tough negotiator. Unlike some people, she understands high finance. Sarah smiled. It was a terrifying smile. I'm glad you think so, Caleb, she said softly. She reached into her clutch bag and pulled out a business card. It was thick, black cardstock with gold lettering. She slid it across the white tablecloth, past the centerpiece, until it rested right next to Caleb's wine glass. Caleb looked down. Kensington, Global Enterprises. Sarah Miller, Executive Director of Strategic Acquisitions. Email, smiller@kensington.com. Caleb stared at the card. He blinked. He read it again. S. Miller, he whispered. Sarah. Miller? You never did pay attention to details, did you, Caleb? Sarah said, taking a sip of wine. You've been sending me emails for 3 months, begging for a meeting, sending me your financial reports, telling me how you plan to trim the fat after the merger. Caleb's face went grey. No, that's impossible. You're a librarian. Was, Sarah corrected, until you told me I needed to fit the part. So I did. Richard Van Doren choked on his wine. You? He wheezed, looking at Sarah. You are the director? You are the one holding up the deal? She is, Victoria confirmed, sounding bored. And I trust her judgment implicitly. If Sarah says a company is rotten, we don't buy it. If she says the management is incompetent, we fire them. Victoria turned her gaze to Richard. Sarah has been reviewing Caleb's files for weeks, specifically the consulting fees he's been paying to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. The silence at the table was absolute. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Jessica turned to Caleb, her eyes wide with horror. Caleb, what is she talking about? What shell company? Caleb stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous. This is a setup. She's lying, Richard. She's just a bitter ex-wife trying to ruin my wedding. Sit down, Caleb, Richard barked. No, I won't sit down, Caleb yelled, his face twisted in panic. She's a nobody. I made her. I left her and she's trying to destroy me. He pointed a shaking finger at Sarah. You think you can come here and intimidate me? I'm the VP of this company. You're nothing without me. Sarah didn't flinch. She remained seated, looking up at him with pity. Actually, Caleb, she said quietly, but her voice carried clearly. As of Monday morning, Oakhaven belongs to Kensington, which means I'm your boss. She paused for effect. And Caleb, I don't tolerate employees who scream at executives. You can't fire me, Caleb screamed, losing all control. I'm the groom. This is my wedding. Yes, Sarah said, glancing around the silent ballroom, where 300 guests were watching the groom melt down. It is your wedding. You should probably try to enjoy it. It's likely the last party you'll be able to afford. Caleb looked around. He saw the shock on the guests' faces. He saw the disgust on his father-in-law's face. He saw the fear in Jessica's eyes. He realized with a sinking feeling in his gut that the nightmare had only just begun. Victoria stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Well," she said briskly, "the food looks mediocre, and the company is loud. Sarah, darling, shall we go? I believe we have seen enough to make our decision for Monday." "Wait!" Richard Van Doren scrambled up. "Victoria, please, don't leave. We can discuss this." "We will discuss it on Monday, Richard," Victoria said coldly. "In my office. Bring your lawyers. And bring him." She gestured vaguely at Caleb as if he were a stain on the carpet. Sarah stood up, looking taller than ever in her crimson gown. She looked at Caleb one last time. "Happy wedding, Caleb," she said. "The gift is in the mail." She turned and walked away, arm in arm with Victoria, leaving the groom standing in the wreckage of his own arrogance, while the bride buried her face in her hands and began to sob. But Sarah wasn't done yet. She stopped at the DJ booth on her way out. "Excuse me," she said to the stunned DJ. "The groom has a special request. He'd like to play Hit the Road Jack, for old time's sake." She dropped $100 bill on the turntable and walked out into the New York night, the music starting up behind her as the ballroom descended into chaos. The music had stopped hours ago, but the ringing in Caleb's ears wouldn't quit. It was Sunday morning, the first day of his marriage. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed in the honeymoon suite, his head throbbing with a hangover that felt like a drill press. The suite was a wreck. Champagne bottles were overturned. A chair was knocked on its side. It looked like a battlefield, which was appropriate, because World War III had broken out the moment Sarah walked out those doors. "Are you going to stare at the floor all day, or are you going to fix this?" Caleb looked up. Jessica was standing by the window, staring out at the grey New York skyline. She wasn't wearing lingerie. She was wearing a bathrobe, arms crossed tight across her chest. Her wedding dress was crumpled in a pile in the corner, looking like a dead swan. "Jess, please," Caleb croaked. "My head." "Your head?" Jessica spun around, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "My father left the reception at 9 p.m. Caleb! 9 p.m. Do you know how embarrassing that is? The chairman of Oakhaven left his daughter's wedding to call his lawyers because his new son-in-law is apparently an embezzler." "I am not an embezzler," Caleb snapped, standing up too fast and swaying. "Sarah is lying. She's vindictive. She cooked the books to frame me. It's a classic jealous ex move." "Is it?" Jessica walked over, getting right in his face. "Because she didn't look jealous, Caleb. She looked expensive. She looked like she owned the building, and you looked like a terrified little boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar." "I can handle Sarah," Caleb lied, pacing the room. "She used to fold my laundry. I know how she thinks. She wants an apology? Fine. I'll apologize. I'll charm her. I'll remind her of the good times." "You are delusional," Jessica scoffed. "My father is talking about annulling the marriage, Caleb." Caleb froze. "He can't do that." "Watch him. If the Kensington deal falls through because of you, Oakhaven goes under. We lose the Hamptons house, the penthouses, everything. Daddy isn't going to let that happen. He'll cut off the limb to save the body. And you are the limb." Caleb grabbed his phone. He had to get ahead of this. He dialed Sarah's number. It went straight to voicemail. He dialed again. Voicemail. He opened his email and frantically typed a message to s.miller@kensington.com. Subject: Urgent misunderstanding. "Sarah, last night was intense. I think emotions ran high. We need to talk before the meeting tomorrow. Just the two of us. Coffee? For old time's sake? I know you're hurt, but let's not let personal feelings destroy a professional deal. I can help you with the transition. I know where the bodies are buried at Oakhaven. Call me, please. Caleb." He hit send and waited. 1 minute, 5 minutes. A notification pinged. From S. Miller. Subject: urgent, misunderstanding. Mr. Sterling, all communications must now be directed through our legal counsel. Do not contact me personally again. See you in the boardroom at 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. Sarah Miller, Executive Director. Caleb threw the phone against the wall. It cracked just like his life was doing. Meanwhile, across town, in a sun-drenched penthouse overlooking Central Park, Sarah was having a very different morning. She was sitting on a white velvet sofa, sipping matcha tea. Victoria Kensington was opposite her, reading the Sunday Times. "You made the gossip column," Victoria noted, not looking up. Page 6. Mystery woman in red upstages bride at Sterling Van Doren nuptials. Sarah smiled. Did they mention the car? They called it a war chariot. I like that. Victoria folded the paper. Are you ready for tomorrow? It's one thing to crash a wedding. It's another to decapitate a company. I'm ready, Sarah said, her voice steady. I spent 3 years analyzing Oakhaven's accounts while I was interning, then working my way up. Caleb got lazy. He thought no one was watching the miscellaneous consultant fees. He thought because he was marrying the boss's daughter, he was immune to audits. Arrogance is a powerful anesthetic, Victoria agreed. It dulls the sensation of danger until the knife is already in your throat. Sarah stood up and walked to the window. He told me I was small, Victoria. He told me I had no ambition. Tomorrow, I'm going to show him exactly how big I've become. And the wife? Victoria asked. Jessica. She's a victim in this too, in a way, Sarah mused. But she's also a Van Doren. She'll choose survival over love. I'm counting on it. The headquarters of Kensington Global Enterprises was a fortress of glass and steel in Midtown Manhattan. The boardroom on the 50th floor was known as the Shark Tank. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, a table made of black marble, and air conditioning that was always set just a few degrees too cold. At 8:55 a.m., Caleb Sterling walked out of the elevator. He looked terrible. His skin was pasty, his eyes darted around nervously, and his suit, usually impeccable, looked slightly too large for him, as if he had shrunk overnight. Beside him walked Richard Van Doren. The older man wasn't looking at Caleb. He was clutching a leather briefcase, white-knuckled, muttering to his team of 3 lawyers. They were ushered into the boardroom. Sarah was already there. She sat at the head of the table, flanked by Victoria Kensington and 2 serious-looking men in grey suits, forensic accountants. Sarah wore a navy blue power suit, her hair pulled back in a severe, professional bun. She didn't smile. She didn't say hello. She just gestured to the empty seats. Sit, she commanded. Caleb sat. He tried to muster a smile. Sarah, listen. About Saturday. Mr. Sterling, Sarah cut him off, her voice sharp as a whip. This is a business meeting. Address me as Ms. Miller or Director. If you cannot maintain professional decorum, security will remove you. Caleb's jaw snapped shut. Richard kicked him under the table. Ms. Miller, Richard said, his voice trembling slightly. Ms. Kensington, we are here to finalize the acquisition. Oakhaven is ready to sign. We were ready to sign, Sarah corrected, until a due diligence review this weekend uncovered significant irregularities in your operational budget. She slid a thick black folder across the marble table. It stopped directly in front of Richard. Page 4, Sarah said. Item 7B. Richard opened the folder. He put on his reading glasses. As he read, his face went from pale to red to a terrifying shade of purple. Consulting services, Richard read aloud. Provider, Apex Strategy Group. Location, Georgetown, Cayman Islands. Monthly retainer, 15,000. Total over 3 years, 540,000. Richard looked up. Who is Apex Strategy Group? We don't use consultants in the Caymans. Exactly, Sarah said. I looked into Apex Strategy. It's a shell company. It has no employees, no office, and no clients, except Oak Haven. She pressed a button on her laptop, and a document appeared on the massive screen on the wall. It was a bank registration form. This is the incorporation document for Apex Strategy, Sarah narrated. Look at the signature of the beneficiary. Caleb closed his eyes. He knew what was coming. On the screen, in jagged, rushed handwriting, was the signature. Caleb J. Sterling. The silence in the room was deafening. You stole from me, Richard whispered. The betrayal in his voice was raw. I brought you into my family. I gave you a job. I gave you my daughter. And you were stealing $500,000 from me. It was a bonus structure, Caleb stammered, sweat pouring down his face. I was going to pay it back. It was an advance, for the wedding, for the house. I did it for Jessica. Don't you dare bring my daughter into this, Richard roared, slamming his fist on the table. It's not just the money, Richard, Sarah interrupted calmly. It's the liability. If Kensington acquires Oak Haven, we acquire this fraud. We acquire the tax evasion charges that will inevitably follow. And frankly, we don't do business with criminals. Victoria Kensington leaned forward. The deal is off, Richard. We are withdrawing our offer. Oak Haven is toxic. No, Richard pleaded, standing up. Victoria, please. Without this buyout, the bank calls our loans on Friday. We'll be insolvent. You can't let one bad apple destroy a 40-year-old company. Then remove the apple, Victoria said cold-heartedly. He's fired, Richard shouted, pointing at Caleb. He's gone. Effective immediately. I'll sue him for every penny. It's not enough, Sarah said. She stood up and walked around the table, stopping behind Caleb's chair. You see, Richard, firing him solves the future. But it doesn't fix the past. The money is gone. The reputation is damaged. Sarah looked down at the top of Caleb's head. He was trembling. However, Sarah said, her voice softening deceptively, there is a way to salvage the deal. Caleb looked up, hope sparking in his eyes. Yes. Yes, anything. I'll sign whatever you want. Oh, you will sign, Caleb, Sarah said, but not for the job. She placed a single sheet of paper in front of him. This is a confession, Sarah explained. It details the embezzlement, the wire fraud, and the falsification of records. It admits sole liability. It exonerates Oak Haven and the Van Doren family completely. If I sign this, I go to jail, Caleb whispered, reading the document. Likely, Sarah agreed. But if you don't sign it, I hand the full audit trail to the SEC and the FBI anyway. They will find the money, Caleb. This way, at least you save the company. Maybe Richard will put in a good word for you with the judge if you cooperate. She leaned in close to his ear. Remember when we were married, Caleb, and I lost my job at the library because of budget cuts? You told me, sometimes you have to be the sacrifice for the greater good. She pulled back, her eyes hard. Be the sacrifice, Caleb. Caleb looked at Richard. Richard looked away, his face stone. He looked at the lawyers. They were staring at the floor. He was alone. With a shaking hand, Caleb picked up the pen. He signed his name. Good, Sarah said, snatching the paper away before the ink was dry. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. Is it done? Everyone turned. Jessica Van Doren stood in the doorway. She was wearing sunglasses and a black trench coat. She looked like she was dressed for a funeral. Jessica. Caleb stood up. Babe, I did it for us. I signed it. I'm going to fix this. Jessica walked into the room. She didn't look at Caleb. She walked straight to Sarah. "Did he sign the confession?" Jessica asked Sarah. "He did." Sarah handed her a copy. "Excellent." Jessica turned to her father's lawyer. "File the annulment papers immediately. Cite fraud and criminal deception. I want the marriage dissolved by noon." "Jess!" Caleb screamed, reaching for her. "You can't do this. We're married. We love each other." Jessica finally took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were dry and cold. "I loved a vice president, Caleb," she said cruelly. "I didn't marry a convict." She turned to Sarah. "Thank you, Miss Miller. My father told me you found the accounts. You saved me from making a very expensive mistake. If there's anything I can do—" Sarah looked at the woman who had replaced her. She felt no anger, only pity. "Just take him out of my building," Sarah said. "I have work to do." Security guards stepped forward, grabbing Caleb by the arms. As they dragged him out, kicking and screaming about his rights, Sarah sat back down at the head of the table. She picked up her pen. "Now, Richard," she said, her voice back to professional calm. "Let's talk about the valuation of Oakhaven. Since you just lost your VP and admitted to a major financial scandal, I think a 20% reduction in the purchase price is fair." "Don't you?" Richard slumped in his chair, defeated. Yes, that's fair." Sarah smiled. It wasn't a smile of revenge. It was the smile of business, and business was good. 6 months had passed since the Red Wedding, as the tabloids had dubbed the disaster at the St. Regis. The scandal had been the talk of New York for weeks, fueling gossip blogs and financial news alike. But news cycles move fast, and the city had moved on. Sarah Miller, however, had not just moved on. She had ascended. She sat in the corner office of the newly rebranded Kensington Sterling Partners. The Sterling in the name didn't refer to Caleb. It was a deliberate choice by Victoria to keep the legacy name of the firm's original founders from the 1920s, erasing Caleb's short, toxic tenure as if he had never existed. The office was unrecognizable. The dark, oppressive mahogany and leather that Caleb loved were gone. The space was now airy, filled with cream tones, modern art, and light. Sarah adjusted the cuffs of her silk blouse as her assistant, a bright young man named Leo, walked in. "The journalist from Forbes is here for the Women to Watch profile," Leo said. "And you received another letter. From upstate." Sarah's expression didn't change. She knew who it was from. Caleb was currently serving the first year of a 5-year sentence at a minimum security facility for wire fraud and embezzlement. "Burn it," Sarah said, not even looking at the envelope. "You don't want to read it?" Leo asked, hesitating. "It's marked personal and apologetic." "He isn't sorry, Leo. He's just bored," Sarah said, turning back to her computer. "Caleb only apologizes when he needs something. He probably wants money for the commissary or a character reference for an appeal. Burn it." "Understood." Leo dropped the letter into the shredder by the door. The sound of the paper tearing was the only closure Sarah needed. The interview with Forbes went smoothly. Sarah spoke about the acquisition, the restructuring of Oakhaven, and her strategy for ethical investing. She didn't mention Caleb once. When the reporter tried to pry into her past marriage, Sarah simply smiled, that terrifyingly polite smile she had learned from Victoria. "I prefer to focus on assets that have value," she told the reporter. "My past marriage was a liability." We wrote it off. After the interview, Sarah left the office early. She had one final piece of business to attend to, a personal acquisition. She instructed her driver to take her to the suburbs, to a quiet, leafy street in Westchester. The car pulled up to a familiar colonial-style house with white shutters and a manicured lawn. It was the house she and Caleb had bought 5 years ago, the house she had spent months painting, where she had planted the garden, and where Caleb had told her to pack her bags and get out, because she wasn't impressive enough. The house had been seized by the bank as part of the asset forfeiture to pay back Caleb's debts. Today, it was back on the market, sold at a foreclosure auction. Sarah stepped out of the car. The for sale sign was already being taken down. A real estate agent hurried over, looking flustered to see the luxury sedan. "Ms. Miller, congratulations. The electronic transfer went through an hour ago. The keys are yours." Sarah took the heavy brass key. It felt cold in her hand. "Are you planning to move in?" the agent asked. "It's a beautiful property. Turnkey ready." "No," Sarah said, looking at the windows. "I have a penthouse in the city. I don't like the commute." "Then, an investment property? A rental?" "Something like that." Sarah unlocked the front door and walked in. The house smelled musty. The furniture was gone, but the memories were still etched into the walls. She walked into the kitchen. She stood in the exact spot where Caleb had laughed at her ambitions. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She expected to feel anger, or sadness, or even triumph. But she felt nothing. Just space. The ghost of the woman she used to be, the timid, insecure Sarah, was gone. Her phone buzzed. It was Victoria. "Did you buy it?" Victoria's voice was crisp. "I did," Sarah said. "Sentimental clutter," Victoria scoffed, though there was warmth in her voice. "Why buy the house of the man who ruined you?" "He didn't ruin me, Victoria. He made me," Sarah corrected, running her hand along the granite counter. "If he hadn't been so cruel, I never would have applied for the job with you. I never would have found my spine. I bought the house to remind myself that the worst thing that ever happened to me was actually the best." "Fair point," Victoria conceded. "So, what will you do with it? Burn it down?" "No," Sarah smiled. "I'm gifting the deed to the local women's shelter. They need a transitional home for women starting over after leaving abusive partners. I think it's poetic. Caleb's monument to his own ego will now be a sanctuary for the women he despised." Victoria laughed, a sound of genuine delight. "You are dangerous, Sarah Miller. Remind me never to cross you." "I learned from the best," Sarah replied. She walked out of the house, locking the door on her past forever. She handed the keys to the confused real estate agent. "Give these to the director of the safe haven shelter," Sarah instructed. "Tell them the rent is paid in full. Forever." Sarah got back into her car. As the driver pulled away, she didn't look back at the house. She pulled down the vanity mirror and checked her lipstick. It was red. Bright, bold, unapologetic red. Her phone pinged with an email notification. It was a new deal proposal from a firm in London. A massive merger. Complicated, messy, and potentially worth billions. Sarah smiled. She opened her laptop. "To the airport," she told the driver. "We have a company to buy." The Rolls-Royce merged onto the highway, speeding toward the skyline of New York City, where the lights were just starting to twinkle like diamonds in the dusk. Sarah Miller wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. And somewhere in a lonely cell, Caleb Sterling sat on a hard bunk, wondering how the quiet librarian he threw away had ended up owning the world. And that is how Sarah turned her deepest humiliation into her greatest victory. She proved that success isn't about how loud you shout or how much money you pretend to have. It's about resilience, intelligence, and the quiet power of knowing your own worth. Caleb thought he could break her by inviting her to his wedding, but he only handed her the stage to showcase her transformation. In the end, the best revenge wasn't making him suffer. It was outgrowing him completely and using the wreckage of his ego to build a foundation for others. If you enjoyed this story of karma and ultimate payback, please hit that like button. It helps the channel so much. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And I want to hear from you in the comments. If you were Sarah, would you have bought the house, or would you have just walked away? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.